Paresa, I notice both you and I are working from home today, as many of us often are. And how is that working for you so far? Have you fully adjusted now that we're almost a year into the COVID situation, the work from home environment?
Yeah, I feel like there's two types of people. There's some people who thrive in the office, and there's some people who thrive kind of like working wherever. I'm definitely the latter. I feel like I get more done when I'm working from home just because I'm a kind of, a chatty Cathy over here. I'll talk to the people around me in the office and get easily distracted. Whereas when I'm at home, I'm kind of, in my office, getting work done, banging out the projects. So for me, it's been going great. I know that for some of my friends, they have had a different experience, and it was more of an adjustment for them. But yeah, over here, I have no complaints. I'm actually enjoying it. How about you?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, for times like this where we're recording podcasts or whatnot, it can be a little challenging with dogs in the background, which I have here, and kids working from home or doing school from home. But yeah, you kind of get used to it, just like the rest of the world. It's interesting because I feel like you get to know people a little bit better when you see them in their homes and you see their dog or cat or kids in the background or their spouse walking by or whatever. So it's a little bit more personal in some ways. So I kind of enjoy the humanity of it and the imperfection of it all. I think it makes us all a little more real in that way. So that makes it fun.
I agree. I agree. No, but you're right. It is hard. I have a 2.5 year old and he is a rambunctious fellow. So, juggling that definitely poses a challenge sometimes, especially when you're on calls. But between my husband and I, we figured it out. We have some childcare help. So I feel like everybody's kind of figured it out. And I think, at the beginning in, March, April 2020, when this all happened, everybody was like, running around like chickens with their heads cut off with their toddlers on the Zoom calls and they're
Yeah.
having all the challenges. But I feel like we're at a point of adapting, and it seems like based on recent news, some of these companies, these bigger companies, are really getting acclimated to it and adopting this whole remote workforce concept permanently. Spotify actually recently announced that their whole staff can work from anywhere forever. I mean, they're not ever going to go back into the office. And there's, a couple other, Zillow, I know Salesforce, Slack. We talked about that on previous episodes with Salesforce and Slack, but it's just interesting to see the absolute pivot that some of these companies are making and just embracing the new age.
Yeah. It is a question I have is will we ever return back to the days of going to the office Monday through Friday? Being in consulting, we never really had that model to begin with. We had a pretty flexible model, but most industries and most office workers didn't have that luxury. So it's interesting to see some of these big companies. I wonder, I do wonder. I mean, first of all, there's a financial implication. So they're saving money by not necessarily having the big office footprint that they might have had in the past. But I wonder, how to find that balance between the flexibility and the work life balance that everyone's striving for, but not losing that collaboration and the culture that you're trying to build as an organization. And that latter part is really hard to do when you're 100% remote. We have technologies like Zoom or Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever that can help with collaboration, but that only gets you so far. It's just not the same as being in person, and it is hard to build a culture in that way. So I'll be curious to see how companies adjust to that, where the pendulum lands on the whole spectrum of 100% work from home versus 100% work in the office.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, if you were in the office, you could just kind of turn around and ask your coworker a question. Whereas now, you have to ping them or shoot them an email. And I think, kind of going back to the Salesforce Slack acquisition, that's kind of what Salesforce was going for, was opening up a kind of a new channel of communication for employees to correspond a little easier, right? So they kind of still grasp it, but is it the same? I don't know. It's not that face to face interaction, so it's kind of up in the air. But I agree, it's kind of that trade off, because I feel like mental health of employees, if you have the option to go work on the beach and do, as long as you're getting work done, but you're somewhere else, I feel like that's going to help with the mental health, which you could argue would drive production. But then on the other side, would those act as distractions? So I feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, yeah, it's very very true. And you also think about some of the just the nuances of, for example, when we do digital transformations, obviously most of it's remote now, although we are starting to see more and more clients that are slowly returning back to the office. And in some parts of the world or some countries we're doing business in, they're kind of back to normal and just full on, back to the office. So it's interesting how different parts of the world are adjusting a little bit differently. But when we do these digital transformations and the workshops that go along with it and some of the deep dives into operations and things like that, it's been really interesting to see how effective we can be remotely by doing the stuff that we typically do, in person. But it's also a reminder that you still miss out on stuff. I mean, there's still little things, little nuances you miss about getting to know a client, their operations, the culture, just getting to know people on a personal level, just having little sidebar conversations that you can't really have on a Zoom call with 50 other people on the line. So it's just little things like that. I think little nuances that are important, not just for organizations in general, but also for digital transformations and people that are going through the process.
Absolutely. And I will say one solution to that, I don't know if it would totally fill the need because there's just something about that face-to-face dynamic, but there's different ways that you can engage your clients, your partners, your employees through virtual events. There are such thing as virtual wine tastings, virtual cooking classes, virtual dinner parties, etc., that you could tap into that oftentimes are on a national and sometimes an international scale. So, it's kind of, if this is the new normal, then we have to find the new normal of the other components that play into what we once had. It's just a matter of adapting. And in this age, it's all about technology, right?
Right, right. No, it's very very true. Um, and then some of these transformations that are midstream too. Another thing we'll be curious to see is how organizations adjust. Will they, you know, this is more of a question. I don't have a good answer to it, but will they start bringing people to a central war room, like we would typically do in the past, where you've got a big conference room where you're in there testing systems or doing workshops on business processes and blueprints or whatever. So that'll be an interesting nuance to see how companies respond to that in their transformation efforts too.
Right. Right. Well, I'm curious to hear about this client that kind of dropped the ball and then came to you guys, and you guys are helping them kind of pick up the pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, the missteps that this client had in this first case study we're going to get to in a second had nothing to do with the fact that it was in a COVID environment and remote workforce or remote collaboration. That was the least of the problems with this situation. So it will be interesting to dive in. So we'll take a quick break. And before we do, speaking of Spotify, you can listen to this podcast on Spotify, among other places, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. And you can also watch us every Wednesday on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. London, and 11 p.m. Hong Kong. So be sure to check us out there, subscribe to us on YouTube and or the podcast platforms.